Vladimir Putin's least developed quality is his ability to demonstrate human empathy. Not only is he unable to show compassion, he has no talent for faking it. He can't find the right words. He has no pity for others. And so, having sent hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens into battle, this week he met with mothers who are either expecting to receive a message that their son has died or have already found out.
Мой сын Пшеничкин Константин в одном из утренних боев, защищая город, погиб.
Yet, this is no cause for worry. The military commander-in-chief wasn't just meeting with any mothers. He was meeting with the right mothers, verified mothers, state employees, functionaries of the All Russia People's Front, and activists for pro-Kremlin organizations.
Specially selected mothers of soldiers. The women Putin met with turned out to be employees and officials of the ONF and other pro-government movements.
And so even a mother in grief who has lost her son and does not hold back her tears has no doubts about the need to kill Ukrainians.
Он выскочил из окопа, вызвал огонь на себя, и последние его слова были: «Пойдем, братва, рубить укропов».
Smugly drinking tea, the president talks about the frailty of life. We're all mortal, we all die. And what's important, after all, is how a life is lived, says the elderly person who has lived a long and eventful life, spending his entire COVID lockdown in a bunker without so much as even his own cabinet ministers allowed within arm's reach. Remember that famously long table? Well, now what do? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. But in this case, he who taketh away was in fact Vladimir Putin.
Конечно, это огромная трагедия, это пустота, которую ничем не заполнить. Вы сейчас об этом так очень убедительно, ярко сказали. Когда нет близкого человека, тем более сына. Но...
But what? But the president of the Russian Federation decided to take away this unfortunate woman's loved one. I don't know where the limit of hypocrisy in the Putin system is, but this conversation seems to be close to that edge. It is touching that the organizer of a criminal war in a neighboring state uses such words as mother and her boy, portraying a familiarity with the topic of family. But he only ever saw these boys in both the literal and the figurative sense as bodies in coffins. The mothers of the mobilized, who really had questions for the president, didn't even get an invitation to the Vladimir Putin's residence.
We came to him ourselves, publicly saying that we don't have the answers to many of our questions, and suddenly they begin to meet with someone else. We would like to and are ready to start a dialogue, but for some reason they're not inviting us real people in.
It seems to me that Vladimir Putin is a terribly unhappy person. Well, what pleases him? What does he find enjoyable? How does he spend his free time? I'm afraid that in pursuit of world domination under the protection of endless security officers locked in an armored office, he is deprived of understanding the meaning of life. In his view, you will either die from vodka or in a war. And for the common people, the second option is absolutely perfect.
Вопрос в том, как мы жили. Некоторые ведь живут или не живут непонятно, и как уходят от водки там, или еще от чего-то. Непонятно. А потом ушли, жили и не жили. Тоже не, и незаметно пролистнулось как-то. То ли жил человек, то ли нет. А ваш сын жил.
The president of Russia is not aware that there are a million other versions of a happy life between alcoholism and war. He hasn't seen them, he hasn't tried them himself, and his opinion about the people he leads seems most unflattering.
А зачем нам такой мир, если там не будет России?
Vladimir Putin never wanted to meet the military mothers, not even the safe ones. For him, it's a waste of time, bad acting. And there was no talk about supporting the soldiers because, well, why protect those who, in theory, must inevitably drink themselves to death, in extreme cases die in a car crash? And it is not without reason that on social networks, even for the posts by pro-Kremlin media, there are an endless number of curses against the leader of the nation. And the commander-in-chief gets no help either when local officials hand over towel sets and postcards to mothers of dead soldiers. You get the impression that a person can accept and is ready to accept the death of a loved one just by deceiving herself with propaganda, but not everyone. There are more and more women, mothers and wives in Russia who are starting to talk and even protest. And so naturally, the repression intensifies. What is the outcome? Perhaps Putin's greatest fear comes from the unknown power of these women and their grief. A Ukrainian advisor to President Zelensky last month predicted that it is in fact a women's rebellion in Russia that scares Putin the most. With more on the power of a women's movement in Russia, we now turn to Russian journalist and curator Anna Narinskaya. Anna, good to see you on TV Rain. And I need to tell my viewers right now that we are friends, so we know each other for a long time. The first thing that I was wondering about is the power of women in Russia. Do you think that it can change anything? And do you see any new wave of the protest from the mothers, wives, sisters, and so on?
First of all, I should say that, the first thing I should say that there were lots of discussions on why mothers in Russia, they're silent. And it was mostly not about women in general, but about mothers. And which I think is really unfair, because nobody is asking why fathers are, not doing anything about their kids, their sons going to the war to kill and to be killed, So it's still kind of this very special attitude towards women, that's women, being in that position, because as you know, Katya, the position of women in Russia is always been and now is even more vulnerable. The domestic violence is still legal in Russia. So women been oppressed for lots of women. They've been oppressed in Russian Empire and been in other way, not visible maybe way, but that's a long thing to discuss. But still, I'm positive they've been oppressed in Soviet Union. Now they're oppressed in Russia. So of course, it's really hard for this human being not able to raise her voice for such a long time, to raise her voice now in such a spooky, I would say, such a dangerous situation. But still, there are women protests. Maybe not this enormous women protest we all wish for, like all the women of Russia, all the mothers of Russia, okay, say mothers, they stand up and they protest against the war, because women are, always more for peace.
Yeah.
Men. Yes, but there are different splashes of protest in different places. And I'm very sad that lots of, I would say, us liberals, we are not appreciating what's going on, because I believe several weeks ago, there was a sort of big, I wouldn't call it uprising, but some sort of noise produced by women who were very unhappy because their kids were sent to Ukraine with no equipment, with not enough warm clothes, that they didn't have even a place to sleep. And I heard and I've seen on social media those discussions saying this is like Jews in Auschwitz would protest against, not good enough gas. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I feel, that's so incredibly hypocritical and so even those protests, I feel very important. Something is changing, I think, among young women like women in their 20s, they say there are all other issues, the issues of feminism, the issues of even in these horrible circumstances of the absolute oppression.
I would like to ask you about, in more details, if you don't mind, Anya, about these women you have mentioned. They are protesting the circumstances in which their sons and husbands are right now. They are asking for more, I don't know, accommodation, for ammunition, for money that should be spent on the soldiers and for the soldiers by the government, by the state. So why do you think, I mean, I just want to make it clear for the viewers, because it may be unclear. Why do these women protest about things that are not connected to the murder of Ukrainians? Right? This is what you were talking about, that some of us may not understand. And what's the reason they don't acknowledge that there are, you know, war crimes committed by Russia right now?
Okay. First of all, I want to remind you about the protests against Vietnam War in the USA, where the major protests were not about, you know, killings of Vietnamese people, actually peaceful Vietnamese people, but against American soldiers being killed in Vietnam. I don't think we have time enough to discuss the psychological
motivation
areas of why people, you know, don't have this pacifistic, and why these women are far more worried about their own sons and husbands, but not about the people in another country about whom those people, these women, were brainwashed by Russian propaganda that they are Nazis. But those protests are the first step to understanding this government and this regime and this power, they are not protecting even their own people. They are only protecting themselves. What do we want? Do we want like the philosophical and really pacifistic agenda? Are we worried about this thing? Or are we worried about something to change? I want to ask you.
No. If it comes to me, I understand perfectly well what is going on. I would like to go to the meeting of Vladimir Putin with this women, with the so-called mothers. I'm saying so-called because they were representing the governmental organizations, and they were very much the mothers, loyal, and so on and so forth. But still, they have kids. They have sons. Some of them had sons because some of them lost their sons on the front in Ukraine. So we saw how Putin was talking to them. We saw the answers of the women, and even their invitation to the Kremlin. They were watching, you know, the beautiful interior of the Kremlin and praising this, and even singing and so on and so forth. I mean, this is something ridiculous, I would say, and astonishing. But one more thing has happened after this meeting. I've read hundreds of comments in social media of different people, Russians, saying that this is not normal, you know, cursing Putin and this women, mostly Putin, of course. So do you think that this conversation of the president with this women was a wrong step for Kremlin itself, for Vladimir Putin? Was this a mistake, in your opinion?
We all think, I mean, like that Vladimir Putin lives in his like specific world, maybe even invented by himself. So in this kind of system in which he exists, there is a tradition in which like the most important person in the state, the Tsar, or the leader of the Communist Party, you know, whatever, speaks to women and says, "I feel your pain." And I didn't see, I've been traveling, so I didn't watch the meeting, but I read the kind of the protocol. So, and he was telling them that, you know, we all gonna die. And so it's not a big difference when you die, you know, earlier for the fighting for the good cause, or you die, you know, from vodka when you are old, which is, I find absolutely appalling. But I believe that is in his own system. He's doing like the traditionally right thing, which should be done by the head of the state in such a thing. As you remember, he met the mothers of the Kursk submarine and wives. So that's what he does. And I don't think that in a situation like now, it's important for the Kremlin, the reaction of the people is important at all. I don't think that they bothered about that. As soon as the as reaction is on the internet, but not on the streets.
Anya, the last thing I would like to ask you about is the prospect of this first steps, as you have mentioned them. The first voices that we can hear, no matter what the motivation is, but, you know, we can see that there are women who are, you know, brave enough to say something. Does this lead to something bigger, in your opinion?
You know, for me, it's emotionally and personally hard to predict, because maybe you remember that 4 years ago, me and my friends made this action which called the Mother's March, and we were marching and protesting against the legal actions against teenagers and teenagers being taken to courts for actually, you know, talking to each other or for thinking the wrong stuff, you know, the stuff which regime doesn't like. But now, I wouldn't have guts, me personally. I wouldn't have strengths. The punishment, not the punishment, but the aggression against any protesters is incredible. The aggression and things which could happen to not only you, but your relatives, your friends, people who worked with you. So it's like you have every person who is ready to protest should understand that the regime got hostages. And I'm not saying that being silent, that it is an excuse to be silent. But I understand that people who want to protest, they should overcome this fear and this real danger. And this fear not only about yourself, but about your family. So I don't want to predict anything. I should only say that if it happens, I would admire those people very much.
Anya, thank you. Thank you, really. And I admire your honesty, actually, and what you did before and what we all will do, I hope, in the near future. So thank you very much. Anya Narinskaya was on air, incredible person.